Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. This time, we're going to be looking at something pretty exciting.
Hmm.
I think something with a lot of rhythm, a lot of history, and maybe even a little bit of controversy. We're talking
Fire.
salsa.
That's right.
But the origins of this genre are more complex than you might think, so we really want to get into it. Is it purely Cuban music with a new name,
Mm.
or is it something a lot more multicultural?
Well, and that's what's so fascinating about this topic is you get these really strong opinions on both sides. You have
Hmm.
people who say absolutely salsa is 100% Cuban creation,
Right?
and others who see it as this beautiful fusion of cultures, especially in, the melting pot of New York City in like the 60s and
I
70s.
see. Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay.
Okay, before we get too far into those arguments, can we just rewind a little bit?
Yeah.
What did the Cuban music scene look like before the term salsa?
Yeah. So think about Cuba between the 1920s and the 1950s. This is before the revolution. The island's already like a hotbed of musical innovation. You've got son, guaracha, mambo, all these genres are super popular.
Wow.
And they're already drawing on these African rhythms, but they're transforming into something distinctly Cuban.
So those genres were kind of laying the groundwork for what would become salsa.
Exactly. And this is where that argument of like salsa is just rebranded Cuban music comes in.
Sure.
I mean, even Celia Cruz, the queen of salsa herself, said, quote, salsa is Cuban music with another name.
Wow. Strong words from the queen.
Yeah, strong words. And if you listen to Roberta Fawz's 1957 album, Pintete los Labios Maria, I mean, tell me you don't hear salsa in there.
Yeah.
It's a great example of how those Cuban rhythms were already kind of heading in that direction.
So someone hearing that back then might not have called it salsa, but the
Right.
essence was there.
Exactly. But then things get really interesting when you think about what happens when Cuban music is taken out of Cuba and dropped into a whole new context.
Well, yeah.
Like, think about New York City in the 1960s and 70s.
Yeah.
You have this huge influx of Puerto Rican musicians,
Okay.
and they're bringing their own musical heritage into the mix. They're blending it with these Cuban sounds they love.
So it's not just like a geographical shift, but a cultural one too.
Right?
So does that mean salsa is more of a collaboration than a direct descendant of Cuban music?
Yeah. That's the argument a lot of people make.
Yeah.
And it's pretty compelling when you hear people like Rigoberto Alamalo Zapata talk about it.
Okay.
He's a musician with really deep roots in the scene.
Mm-hmm.
And he argues that salsa isn't just a rebranding, it's like a whole new attitude,
Okay.
a fresh way of arranging this Afro-Cuban music. But it's also shaped by what's happening in New York City at the time, the social and political energy.
So taking those Cuban roots, but adding something new, something that comes from the Puerto Rican experience in New York.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've got Cuba laying the foundation, but then the music scene in New York is adding like a whole new layer to the story. I can already see how complex this origin story is.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm curious, where does the dance fit into all of this?
Ah, that's a great question. Because you can't talk about salsa without talking about the dance, right?
Right.
So we know that the casino style came out of Cuba. It evolved into the roida casino where couples dance in a circle and exchange partners.
So it's a very social, interactive style.
Yeah,
Yeah.
very much so. But as salsa spreads, different regional styles start popping up.
Okay.
You have the more linear styles developing in places like New York, Puerto Rico, Los Angeles,
Mhm.
where couples dance in a more like slot position.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's Cali, Colombia, which becomes this like salsa powerhouse
Wow.
known for crazy fast footwork and even acrobatic moves.
Wow. That's amazing. So the dance itself is like a map of all these different cultural influences and interpretations.
It really is.
I'm starting to think that salsa might be less about a single point of origin and more about this like constant evolution, this back and forth between tradition and innovation.
Mhm.
Is that a fair way to look at it?
I think so. I think you're really onto something. The whole debate about who owns salsa is really a debate about how we understand cultural exchange
Right.
and the way music and dance can kind of transcend borders.
Wow. It sounds like we've only just scratched the surface here. I'm ready to get into how the term salsa came to represent such a diverse range of styles and expressions.
Yeah, me too. It's
Okay,
fascinating.
we'll be right back after a quick break.